I'm Hindol Sen Gupta. I'm absolutely delighted that Lieutenant General Balbir Singh Sandhu has joined me today. The general, of course, has a long career in the Indian military. And one of the things that he's specially known for is as an expert of military logistics. Now, I invited the general to have this conversation with me because I'm trying to understand India is going through a huge amount of change in two things: its military logistics and, of course, its indigenous military production. How does the general see this? What does this mean for our strategic dimension going forward? All this with General Sandhu. General, thank you very much.
My pleasure. Anytime. It's always a pleasure to discuss subjects of my interest, and I'm glad I'll be discussing with a person who has strategic interest and yet not from the military. Yeah.
Wonderful. General, then please begin by talking to us a little bit about what are these changes that India is making from your point of view as an expert, in its military logistics and in its indigenous defense production that are particularly exciting.
Uh, Let me tell you one thing. One thing that is constant and common overall in life is change. And in the military, for sure, I served for about 4 decades, starting as a young officer and retired as head of my service. All the time, the military, if you know, uh, produces new formations without additional manpower, unlike other services. You know, there's a great addition in manpower when you talk of raising more ITBP battalion, BSF battalion. In the case of Army, from 1971, there's been hardly any addition of manpower. We try to transform with improvement in technology. We try to reduce manpower and in the non-essential areas and redeploy it for the combat purposes. We call it tooth to tail ratio. Like when I joined service, we used to be authorized 2 point some drivers per vehicle. Now it has come to 1.33. When I say 1.33 means it caters for people on leave, it caters for people who are sick or hospitalized, and yet the army is expected to be as combat effective as it was earlier. So the change in the military overall organization, equipping it, logistics has been a constant thing ever since I joined the army till I left the army. However, there have been a number of attempts at transformation. There was one attempt somewhere about 20 years back when they wanted to reorganize the entire army's, military's logistics in terms of reorganizing the directorates, the arms, and the services. I am of the view always don't make a change for the sake of change. Don't try to copy the West in a lot of areas because Indian India as a country has totally different national security challenges. We are sitting in the middle of two adversaries with unsettled borders, and they are both nuclear. And the worst is that they are conniving with each other to show India down. And all strategy is always the key word in strategy is economics. At any time, when a country wants to rise economically, there'll be somebody who will pull you down militarily, strategically, because it is the same money which either has to go in development and modernization of the nation, or it has to go into military. Military expenditure, that's why it's called non-planned expenditure. And what we see right now in Pakistan, they've been continuing to put a lot of money in the military without being backed by their economy. And you know the state. But Russians went, the USSR or the Warsaw Pact countries tried to match up the NATO, led by US, for from the Second World War onwards till 1990. They could match up militarily, but they were not backed by sound economies, and as a result, they collapsed. So there is a need to transform uh, with a balance, and that's why there's a yardstick called 2 to 3% of your GDP. If you spend on military, It's a balanced, justified expenditure. And in our case, we've been hovering around less than 2 for some time. So to that extent, that is what makes India a progressive country at this stage. And yet, the biggest insurance policy for a nation is its military strength, because there's no point in economically growing if somebody is going to come and pinch your land, somebody is going to come and disturb your economic growth by creating disturbance. So you have to have that expenditure. And army or armed forces for many years have been going by this uh, phrase of tooth to tail ratio, right? You reduce, if I want to raise one more division, I am sanctioned a division without additional manpower by the government. So government tells you, so what we do is we keep milking the manpower from our tail and create a general service pool of say X number of people, say 20,000, 30,000, 40,000. Now that 40,000 is again put in the form of another division. And then equipment, of course, has to come. So that is one way. Manpower is one of the biggest drain on resources, because you have to equip them, man them, feed them, and then thereafter look after them even post retirement. So change has always been there. But the second thing that you spoke about was indigenization. India, somehow the West went through the Industrial Revolution much before us, almost half a century before us. They're in Europe and other countries, primarily the Second World War gave a lot of technology, or First and Second World War, a lot of technology which was initially for the military, and it became a dual-use technology which gave them an edge in the economic growth. And
So we will
we
come to
have,
we will come to indigenization in just a moment,
yeah.
but let me focus a little bit on logistics at the moment. Could you talk to us a little bit about what are the real changes on the ground that are happening with military logistics at the moment in India, and why do you find them exciting?
Okay, the first change that I said already is in the organization. In
Yes.
the organization, we try to save manpower by redeploying them and using technology. Next thing is, in the military, we call a thing like assurance level. There's a just-in-time logistics where civil is concerned, where industry is concerned. Whereas in the case of military, it is just in case, and there's no room for risk. The risk management is done by higher reserves, and at times there have been unrealistic reserves in the past. So we've been continuously redefining our level of reserves at various levels. Thirdly, is we have cut the supply chain. Earlier, you held reserves at various levels. Now you have a direct delivery close to combat zone. And actually, earlier there used to be a thing called combat zone, and there was a rare area we called it as communication zone, right? That line has thinned out. If you go to war, say in Punjab or even in Northeast, the manpower, the civilian population is now living close to the border. That concept of not developing the border area because you might have a war in that area is now fading away. And that there's a very thin line between the national requirement, and I would even go, China does this. You must do development with the strategic point of view, and strategic assets created with the economic point of view, right? If I have to create, say, a zone like, okay, in Tibet, they have created that railway lines and highways, and they all advertise it as for tourism, right? The line between tourism and using the same thing for military purposes is just a change of intent and nothing else. So likewise, the government of India and is now also going in for a very enhanced development of infrastructure in the border areas. And as you develop infrastructure in the forward areas, as you develop industry close to the forward areas, you cut down your supply chain, the length of the supply chain, and you bring in more flexibility. Flexibility is a very important principle of both military strategy as well as military logistics, right? So you reduce the reserves, you have dual use, using the same thing, same infrastructure. Like today, um, Indian Oil Corporation and other thing, PSU oil companies hold the strategic reserves for the army. And when I was a young officer, we used to have reserve petroleum depots in Delhi, in I think close to Lucknow, Barabanki. There used to be something in Maharashtra. Now those days are gone. All those places are so. You are having uh, again same thing of economic infrastructure with a strategic footprint, right? So that is the second thing. And second is non-essential jobs being left out to the civil, right? Uh, Contractors, in fact, say Americans and all, they have contractors operating contracts right in the combat zone. We are, I mean, we've been doing it for quite some time. Now it's becoming almost a routine. So that hiring of civil transport, hiring of aircraft during war, right? Civil transport earlier used to be much far behind. Now we expect them, and I also experienced during the Op Parakram and Op Vijay that every citizen is committed to defending the nation. It is not only that you have to wear uniform. And I found the spirit amongst, says the civilian drivers who are hired or porters who are hired. Earlier we used to have porter companies. Now we hire porters. And I was handling one of these porter companies, and I said, what if somebody uh, gets inside you and he creates? He says, we know each and every one from the village, and there is nobody can dare enter us. And I found that very interesting, right? So there is a time has come with a lot of reliance on civil infrastructure. There's a lot more need to be done. Like I would say, if I am buying vehicles from say Leyland, I'm sure they can be given the entire maintenance right up to the forward areas, except across the border. So you can cut out that manpower, right? And there's a life cycle concept of maintenance. So supply chain is being cut short. The more outsourcing is being done. The dual use of infrastructure, which is for the industry and the civil administration setup. FCI is being tapped. NAFED is being tapped. They provide dual stocks. One is they don't allow the prices in the market to rise, and secondly, that cushion is provided to the army to use. So there are a lot of things that are coming up, and also we are integrating the three services. Say in Mumbai or in Andaman Nicobar Island, you are not having a separate logistic element for Army, Navy, and Air Force. Army and Air Force were already integrated a lot in this aspect. Now the government is coming up, or the IDS headquarters is working with things like they call it joint logistic node, so which looks after all three services. So this way we are trying to economize and be more effective. So that's that I can think of. Uh, Logistics, uh, jointmanship. In fact, the jointmanship, which we've been talking of, theater commands and all, has to start with logistics. We
I have
already
one
have it.
question here, General, if I may.
Yeah.
Uh, what you're talking about seems very interesting, especially at a time when warfare itself, defense itself is changing dramatically. We are talking about an age when countries attack one another with swarm drones, yeah, and you need, particular kind of air defenses to counter those swarm drones. We are talking about a time when AI is transforming, our security landscape. Talk to us a little bit about all these changes, very exciting changes that you just described. How is it making us future ready for our challenges in the future?
So if you recollect, I think this last year's Army Day parade, they they normally show one live demonstration in the end, and this is 2 years back. I think now the Army Day parades are held in various other cities, not in Delhi. I remember I saw it about 2 3 years back. they exhibited swarm drones in an attack, right? So army, we are a country which is extremely lucky that we evolved as a democracy with professionalism amongst the army. Army takes a lot of pride in, probably, I won't be wrong to say, our armed forces, Army, Navy, Air Force, uh, probably the best trained manpower, and it's been proven in combat also. We saw it in 62, not 62, 65, 71, and various other exchanges with China from time to time. Our men and women are extremely well trained. So we are also in sync with in time with what are the latest development. Yes, we are not probably as well equipped with this as with the state of the art gadgets as the West has. But it is always man behind the machine who matters a lot. So when you put this man behind the machine and the equipment, we are for sure a country who cannot be just taken for granted by any army. And we are the most combat experienced armed forces. And even in UN, we contribute the maximum manpower. So, on the equipment side, what has happened is, I think we were caught up in our bureaucratic hold up for a very long time. And a lot of decisions which have been now implemented by this government over the last 10 years, that should have happened about 25, 30 years back, where uh, there has been an emphasis on indigenization. And it has at time been thrust down the throat of the armed forces, which I agree. You cannot always look for the best in the market. It is better to at times wear indigenous jeans than to go and look for Levi's always, right? And with improved fabric and better tailoring over a years, you will also, and also, like I said, if your training and your manning is, or I mean, the human resource is better, you will be able to make up the deficiency. Now, Indian government of India has now put a ban on import of certain things. They are off the list. They are on the list of no go. So you have to develop indigenously. I think there's been a very major impetus to the private industry to participate in the production and equipping of the Indian armed forces. I also find a very interesting development now is that the public sector defense PSUs are now actively partnering with the civil industry to produce the same thing. And also, there's a transfer of technology from the DRDO to both defense PSUs as well as the industry. Now, this might take some time, but I think it's a step in the right direction because after seeing the Russia-Ukraine war, and we also saw the Armenia, Azerbaijan. Unless you are dependent on your own weapons and ammunition, you are likely to be left high and dry when you are in crisis. Imagine the consumption of ammunition in the Russia-Ukraine war is far more than what is produced in the entire world of that caliber, of that class. So I was the other day attending a discussion. The government is now encouraging manufacture and export. The only way to withstand crisis or a combat tomorrow with your adversaries is if you are making and exporting. There is no time. The old warfare of increasing your production capacity is gone. By the time you'll increase your production capacity, the war is over. So probably if you are manufacturing, exporting, especially the ammunition, you can stop exporting and start consuming that for yourself during the war. And no adversary uh, tries anything with you unless the person has tested. These are no secrets. Everybody knows your capabilities, and I think indigenous production. In fact, if you go to the share market, all the shares of the defense production, both public sector as well as the industry, private industry, are really skyrocketing. So it is a clear-cut sign of boost by the government. We read it in the newspapers very often that order for so much has been placed. So this partnership for transfer of technology and indigenization to the maximum extent possible. A lot is happening on this field, and I think over a decade or so we'll see the results, which is not too much of time, where we'll be a much more self-reliant country in terms of defense preparedness and defense
Ask you
production.
this, General. Of course, your point on how a country needs indigenous defense manufacturing, especially in the light of what we are seeing in the Ukraine war, is extremely well taken. Talk to us a little bit about exports. Many people find it almost impossible to believe that India is now today at a position where it's actually exporting armaments around the world. How far do you see this grow? Do you see this really exponentially grow? Do you see, in the next decade or so, India becoming a significant exporter of armaments around the world? How do you see this progress?
See, national security is not arms, ammunition, and the military. It's a much bigger subject where everybody else plays as much important a role. Uh, in fact, it's my own coined phrase that if I have to sum up national security in one word, it would be economy. And if it is two, it is economy and military or defense preparedness. And three would be economy, military, as well as administration, or what do you call it, governance, right? So as India grows as a confident country, which is heading towards becoming the third largest economy, you start exercising influence in the global arena. People trust you to be standing by them at times of crisis. People trust you to be the person whom they can bank on. So, keeping that in mind, there are a lot of countries who are in the domain of uh, having limited requirement of. They don't want state of art Rafale, and they have limited requirement to be confident about themselves. And also in the integrated missile development project, I think we are far ahead of the rest of the world, right? That's a very, very big success story. And in fact, I recently read about BrahMos for Philippines, I think, right?
Yes, that's right.
So you have to see what suits to export. You have to encourage your private industry. Okay, you produce, we give you this concession, either we take it or you export it, right? It is an ecosystem which has to be developed, which creates a win-win situation. And I strongly believe that this concept of just selfishly looking for your own self and not looking at the industry's point of view is a drain on the national confidence in sea. I remember when I was a major, the industry used to say, okay, you tell me to produce a thing, I make it. And then you say, I'm going for an open tender and I'll take L1, right? So where does my investment go? I think government has done a lot of things nowadays to have strategic partnership. There's a Army Design Bureau which has the industry, the intellectual, the intelligentsia, and as well as the military who define their problems. So IITs and say certain MSMEs, they come forward uh, to meet those challenges. And then they are given joint development program where a little bit of um, finance is done by the government and something by the individual. And then they're given assured orders. So that ecosystem is developing, which is encouraging private industry to participate. And once we have more things being produced, I am sure we will find more clients also, because after all, these private industry may be the bigger exporters than the public sector undertaking. So I find, because I think for a very long time we were living on that moral high ground. in terms of foreign policy. We felt we must live by these principles, and I would not be wrong to say we at times compromise our national interests. Say, for example, our relations with Myanmar. For many years, we became uh, you know, the flag bearers of I will not talk to you unless there is democracy. But they are your neighbors. They have a strategic importance for us, which I think has been shunned now. And export of weapons was considered many years back as no-go because it's unethical. Now, for you to be self-reliant, confident, well prepared for your defense, you need to manufacture and export. And I see a lot of potential. I think, though of course, it's easy to say that we have had 200% growth because if your initial figures are less, but I see a lot of potential and I see a lot of encouragement to the industry and uh, coming on the same grid. I'm confident if we go the way we are going for last 7, 8, 10 years, we'll be able to become a big exporter of weapons.
My last question, then, General. You have recently also spoken about the challenges India faces on its peripheries. Manipur, you just mentioned Myanmar. Its peripheries are heating up once again. Some might argue that some peripheries never quieten down ever, but others are heating up once again. So the challenges seems to be growing. In light of all of this, how do you see this indigenization, revamp of logistics helping us counter the renewed threats that we face at our peripheries?
Okay, I have a different point of view on this. Today, the external and internal threats, there's a very thin line between that. There are a lot of things which are in our hand, and there's some which are not in our hand. I would say, uh, if you do your internal things very well, the opportunity for an external threat reduces. If you have a country which is where the rule of law exists, where people are economically prosperous, or where there is a development which is reaching the people. So if you see all these places of insurgency, whether in central India, in J&K, in Northeast, I've served about 10, 12 years in Northeast, moment there is development, people become stakeholders. So I feel the periphery to be tackled, we must do more and more and more development in the peripheral areas. Our look east policy. If I don't develop northeast as a manufacturing base, how can I export to northeast? There is an unfortunate part of Myanmar having a lot of instability, but you can always have better access with Bangladesh and use their economic growth in the periphery and in the border areas will itself make people defend themselves and not allow any sabotage, not allow any military conflict. Economy, along with rule of law, is the key to securing yourself both internally and externally.
I really thank you, General Sandhu, for giving us a really insightful perspective into India's transformation, both in military logistics and in defense indigenization. As you said, India shedding perhaps some false idea of morals to really becoming self-reliant and strategically ready for the future, including development in its entire sort of, strategic understanding of what it requires. General Sandhu, I thank you very much for your time, sir.
No, it's been a pleasure conversing with you. I really enjoyed. Thank you very much. Hope to be in touch. Thank you.